2021. We are privileged to have our honored guest, Mr. Samir Parikh, leadership trainer with us today. Mr. Parikh, thank you for your kind consent and valuable time to address this meet. I would also like to welcome our esteemed panelist, Mr. Sunil Kalyankar, Head HR, Case New Holland Construction Equipments India Private Limited, Pithampur, Ms. Sheetal Naresh Rotia, Head HR, Deccan Sales and Service Private Limited, Indore, Mr. Alok Chaturvedi, AGM HR, Kusum Healthcare, Pithampur. I welcome you all for taking out time of your very, very busy schedule for this HR discussion meet. Mr. Parikh, may I now request you to please address the meet on core strategy, wider reach, the new normal of people practices.
Yeah.
Over to you, Mr. Parikh.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jain. And if you can ask someone to allow me to share my content, so I'll be able to do that. And when I was looking at the video, it reminded me of my days of Baroda Management Association when I had an opportunity to lead the organization. Really highly impressed, and I must compliment all of you for doing awesome work. In those days also, and even in current scenario, at Baroda Management Association, we often refer to Indore Management Association as a benchmark association for offering various activities and initiatives and reaching out to our stakeholders across Central Gujarat and South Gujarat. When I shifted to Mumbai in Bombay Management Association, also we often discussed about Indore Management Association. And today I'm here on his platform. So really honored to be here with all of you. And what I'm going to do is going to share with all of you some of my thoughts in next about, I would say about 20-25 minutes as the time that has been given to me. All put together about 30 odd minutes, and maybe some question answer, some interactions thereafter. So of course, everybody talks about the new normal. So I think I don't think I need to really introduce about the new normal that we are talking about. COVID came, COVID is there. COVID might be there for many years or for many months at least. Disruption in one or the other form will continue to come, and that's what nobody probably imagined, that we all were talking about VUCA all throughout in all those rooms, meeting rooms and all, and we would actually experience to the scale that we are experiencing now. So I think it's a phenomenal experience that all our HR fraternity members, as well as every single individual on the earth, is experiencing today. And I think I must compliment all the HR professionals, because the amazing work done by them is being appreciated by almost all the organizations in all the forums that I have been addressing or I've been part of. And the kind of crisis management that the HR professionals demonstrated was something beyond comprehension of many others. And therefore, I must say that this is the time where we now build up capabilities as to how we can develop our internal capabilities, our culture, our people in a manner that we are able to, we are more like a disruption ready workforce. And from that perspective, we came out, we of course did some survey of about 200 organizations in April. And the next one also is going on now with equal number of organizations. And when we came out with our first report of the new normal, that's where we got a lot of insights of various organizations as to what they are doing or what they were planning to do. And now in the second survey as well. So this presentation, which you are seeing right now, about 6 slides, is wide. I mean, is heavily based on our interactions with very, very large number of business heads and HR heads across India. So just to let you know, first, I'll talk very briefly about what do we mean by core strategy and wider reach, and which are some of the parameters that we need to keep in mind. And then I'll be talking about some of the action inputs, because ultimately what matters is the actions. Whatever we may talk, whatever we may come out with frameworks and theories and models, eventually what happens at the ground level will give us that kind of advantage. So I have prepared a very short list of certain action items which we'll be looking at, and that's where we will end this presentation. So when I'm talking of the entire COVID recommendations for managing the new normal of people practices, there are 5 areas that we need to keep in mind, and that's where we are talking about. It talks about creating internal capabilities for what? Internal capabilities for reserves, resilience, and rationality. It talks about orienting people on agile adaptation of change all the time, that the agility is being spoken probably highest number of times these days. It talks about venerating disruption warriors and disruptive ideas. It's not just talking about plain vanilla recognitions or handing over congratulatory message, but it actually talks about really respecting those warriors and those ideas. It talks about inspiring that kind of culture of trust, because many of us are working in virtual manner. We may continue to work in a virtual manner. We may have to work in a virtual manner, even if today we may be working from office, and we have to be mentally prepared for that kind of scenario quite often. And therefore, that culture of trust is becoming very critical. And developing Sentient leadership, which is equally important, because we really need to create that kind of optimism that flows from the leadership. I think that's what when we talk of COVID, we mean by COVID reco or recommendations for the new normal of people practices. So let's look at what are some of the strategic aspects which we need to consider when we are talking of core strategy for future. And the first one is the creating internal capabilities. And I talked about reserves, I talked about resilience, and I talked about rationality. I'm going to spend a little more time on resilience, because that is the new buzzword in the organizations now. Of course, the word is not new, word is old, but the need felt now is so high that we'll be spending some time on that word resilience a little later. So not only just we build strong internal financial reserves, but very important to encourage employees for savings. So what does that mean for HR? So in my competency framework, if today I don't have any competency talks about frugal mindset, I better introduce that, because that's going to be new normal for any and every organization. And it talks about that kind of mindset. Am I having that kind of mindset where when I'm thinking about building and creating strong reserves for me as well as for my organization? The second important aspect, and I'll be spending some more time at the time of action. So I'm not really taking you through several models or frameworks that we have created for each one of these, or combining many of these. But just now, right now, just giving you a very introductory perspective of what I'm talking about. Resilience is, we will have to invest in creating or building organizational resilience. This is, to me, I think it is a common denominator, is the bare minimum mandatory requirement for anyone who is being now taken on board or as part of our development framework. In fact, I am strongly recommending now to the organizations that have resilience platform in the organization, which frequently checks the level of resilience within the organization. There are quite a few frameworks available. We'll be talking about one such framework. Rationality. For many, I would say for a fairly long time, I would not say many years, but for a fairly long time, we have been looking at creating policies and frameworks and rules and other perspectives within the organization, which are heavily focusing on nurturing employees and their capabilities and creating those kind of outstanding place to work. We will have to bring that rationality of balancing stakeholders' interest. When I say stakeholders, maybe the investors, maybe the owners, vis-a-vis the employees, maybe the customers, vis-a-vis the employees, maybe the vendors, vis-a-vis the employees. Maybe, I mean, I think it's the time has come where it is necessary for us to have a very rational look at all these policies and ensure that there is a good degree of balance that we achieve. And this we may have to achieve again and again and again, but that is probably the need. I was listening to one such interaction of some of the CEOs, and one of the speakers made a very interesting comment. He said, this is the time to right size many things. Right size your customer base, right size your processes, right size your decisions, and so on and so forth. So I think that's where the rational thinking is now picking up. The next in line is how do we orient people on agile adaptation of disruptive changes? And it's an important thing for us to understand that we need to build our strategy around, or build our strategy in a way that prepares people to anticipate and embrace disruptive changes all the time. Because if someone considers that this is a time-bound phenomena, if someone considers this, once this is over, nothing is going to take place, then I think we are wrong. I think we have been given this is a nice opportunity for all of us to really look at how do we prepare ourselves for the future. So that's how we need to orient. It's important for us to build a strategy which doesn't have only plan A, but always have plan B and plan C. Always. As a rule, let's say my HR manual is prepared. I have a HR manual which is a different manual for disruption. And it is plan B, which is ready. I have a HR manual where there is no global disruption, but there is a major disruption within the factory, within the organization. And we do have like on-site and off-site, contingency plans as part of safety. Similarly, for people practices, we will have to have those plan B and plan C as a mandatory routine thing in the organization, and it cannot be that we create at the time of disruption. I think this is one of the learnings that most of us also gather. And we keep orienting employees right from onboarding stage for agile adaptation of three things. This is very critical. One is agile adaptation of policies, but another very important agile adaptation is of the roles. I was talking about this survey report when we released on 30th April, and Dr. TV Rao was there on the panel when four of us were discussing the report. And he made a very interesting observation. He said, now the job description, you have got all kinds of flexibilities, because the willingness of people to accept the alternatives will always be high. And the ones who are not showing that kind of willingness to accept alternatives may find it very difficult to survive and grow within the organization. Therefore, agile adaptation of policies, roles, and benefits. Because benefits you will have to constantly realign with the way organization is moving. And this needs to be perennial exercise as part of your people strategy that, hey, are we doing this? For example, the organizations are having, let's say, certain organizations where they live with the values that they want their people to, really understand and appreciate. They make sure that every single occasion where the group is together, they start with some kind of value meter, some kind of value related discussion, some kind of anecdotal examples. If nothing else, just simply reading them together. The idea is that we are reiterating what we actually want people to practice. And I think that's what strategy is all about. I told you about resilience, and before reaching to the wider reach part, I would like to talk a little bit about resilience piece, because this is discussed in several forums, and there are variety kind of, so the framework that we believe has a very strong application is in front of you. What do we mean by resilience? We all have different definitions. I think in the last 3 months, based on our research, interactions, surveys, extensive discussions, we feel that the framework definition of capacity to adapt positively, very important, positively, to whatever pressure that comes in front of me, the challenges, the setbacks, the changes, in order to achieve not just, let me just spend these days and somehow get rid of them. No. In order to achieve or continue to achieve or at least make an attempt to achieve good performance, reasonably high level of performance. So we are not talking about resilience, which only helps us to, we survive and help us to just float around, but grow further. I think that's the key all of us need to keep in mind. And these are the 8 factors which in the framework that we always recommend. And of course, this is a world leader in talent assessment, PSI. Their framework is there, which is, and as I said, there could be many frameworks. Feel free to choose your own framework. Feel free to choose your own plans, but don't ignore resilience just by talking in the boardroom. Make sure that you have certain actions to convert those strategic thoughts into realities. And we'll be talking about that in the action list. So yes, I think the words are self-explanatory, so I'm not really spending more time on that, conscious of the time that is available with me. And the wider reach for sustenance is the second part of the entire 2-part recommendations that we are making to handle the new normal of people practices. And we talked about disruption warriors and disruptive ideas. Very important is the way we recognize them. Very important is the way we incentivize those ideas. So we are not really talking about, and we have seen, I mean, there are organizations who have seen fantastic results of some of the best practices in this area. It's not something new or rocket science we are talking about. But yes, the degree of recognition and the promptness of incentivizing needs to be changed. And that's where the criticality comes into picture. Highlighting those ideas and those actions are equally becoming important. And how do we highlight? Where do we highlight? At what frequency we highlight? Who highlights those things? Becomes much, much more important aspect. The sentient leadership that I'm talking about, and there are 2 important aspects. Many organizations already have the leadership capability assessment and development framework. I understand that they must be using that. I already told you, in the competency framework, if you don't have frugal mindset, introduce that as a mandatory competency for every single leader, every single manager in the organization. This is so critical. It's talking about mindset. It's not just talking about cost cutting. It is a methodology for cost cutting. It's talking about that kind of triggers in my mind where every single action, and I look at the cost benefit analysis. Continuously develop and coach team leads and managers on this leadership framework, which is full of optimism. Please remember, because when the disruption comes, setback comes, pessimism gets that path to enter. I think that's where a very strong optimism could help us. I've addressed that a little bit in the action area. Especially millennials, very important. And the culture of trust, communication channel, and empathy are the 2 very, very important vehicles for creating culture of trust. I think we can probably spend on each of these 5 1 hour to discuss. But let me right now take you through a very short action repository, which will help you to understand. Only 2 slides and then I'm done. First is what kind of culture shifts I can do. So instead of status quo, can I take certain actions which unsettles things by design. So certain actions which unsettle things by design will prepare people for embracing this kind of surprises, because disruption brings surprises. And that's what the new normal of people practice is all about. I mean, it's not something, again, this is borrowed from fire and safety area where we always do mocks. This in a people practices, we are doing that. In many organizations, there is a good degree of trust, but there is still a trust relying on evidences and verifications, occasionally doubts. Okay. Now is the time where, and it's difficult, it's not going to be easy, because each one of us develops our beliefs based on various experiences. So when we practice that, it requires a different degree of focus and I would say that kind of belief that yes, trusting people and occasionally verifying and simply concluding those things will help me to create a much better virtual environment, if there is a virtual environment, rather than looking at the evidences and proofs and other things. Except, yes, the compliance related things, legal related aspects, absolutely, you have no choice. You have to respect that. And any statutes, not only of the law of the land, but also from my principles, which are prescribed, or from my global headquarters, which are prescribed, I need to follow those things. But when I'm talking of day-to-day conversations, can I really shift that? Can I shift the culture where I'm not only talking about key results? That's one aspect, important. But I now look at results along with the process, because now all of us know that the result of an organization is the function of several other factors. And therefore, we need to constantly give importance to the processes followed by people, and not just by, so not just the what part, but also the how part. That becomes critical. Leadership framework, what we are talking about. How, and again, you can use your own framework, which you are using, or you can fine tune that framework. It is not that you have to redesign entire thing. But are you focusing on optimism, empathy, courage, and emotional stability? These are the 4 key components for Sentient leadership during not only these times, but in future. To me, the new leadership is all about a lot of courage, a lot of emotional strength, very, very sharp empathy, and consistent optimism. I think these 4, and if we can help our leaders continuously invest in themselves and work on these 4 areas, I think we are moving ahead. There is a need for a high-paced leadership development framework for millennials. Now, what would happen, because millennials expect, and this is not a forum to discuss about, baby boomers and Gen X and Gen Y and Gen Z, but yes, there is a fair degree of speed that is expected, and we will have to build in those kind of elements here. And now with a lot of technology that is available for each and every one of us, this should become easy to design and implement. Last part in leadership is very agile succession plans. I am aware of several organizations spending 3 months, 6 months in developing their succession plans, but we need to make sure that our succession plans are very, very agile, and they are robust, and they can be quickly changed. They are more of a modular approach. Certain aspects in performance management, can our IDP include competency of frugal mindset? Can our key result area include contribution to reserve as a mandatory performance area for everyone? Can we look at monthly MSc as a new framework for performance management? Because it's very, very difficult now for annual target and then sticking to that target. These are some of the components of performance management that we need to keep in mind, or those are some of the action areas that we can quickly implement. The development areas resilience platform could be integrated in all development agenda, and content and delivery. My submission is whichever mode that you are using, use synchronous mode more rather than asynchronous. Asynchronous needs very, very high degree of self-motivation for learning. And believe me, except for the areas which are very, very important skills for me or few other areas, it is difficult to sustain self-motivation for learning for many, many people. And therefore, it is important to use synchronous platforms rather than asynchronous. The last part is when we are looking at the selection besides resilience, tech savvy, how much that person is technology driven, how much interest he has in technology, with what speed he embraces technology should be very important criteria for selection. Even though he may not be knowing it today, but is he willing? Is he ready? Is he having that kind of? Is he fond of technology? I think that should be given more importance. Onboarding. Make sure that you are covering about agility for roles, policies, and benefits, and also talking about personal savings. Disruptive skills. Disruption skills. Very important either in laboratory scenario, simulated environment, or on-the-job training. Make sure that we are creating multi-skill workforce. Annual meets, open house, town halls, the keynotes must include things on personal savings and resilience from sports and adventure areas. Storytelling by disruption warriors could be another very important thing. Rewards and recognitions, incentives for disruptive ideas, recognition for disruptive warriors. I already talked about. Very important is instead of fixed plus variable pay, introduce flexi variable pay. That's the key, which has a stretch on both sides, and depending on the organization's movement as well as the macroeconomic scenario in which organization is performing, depending on that movement, it can change. Communication highlights of disruptive ideas and also highlight disruption warriors. Training managers on storytelling and optimistic communication could be a very short capsule programs, can be done on the fly and may not even take a very high time. And tie for mental health support, and make sure that you are having checks and balance for organization versus employee priorities in the policies, and plan B and plan C for all policies. So this is what I felt that as action tips, all of us need to keep in mind. There are many things that could be talked about. I'm sure all of you must have also created your own new normal, and must be practicing those new normal. And I'm given to understand that there is going to be panel discussion after this presentation and discussion. It would be a good idea if some of the organizations want to share their own, practices in terms of new normal and how they are doing that, because that will really help all of us, because there is no one prescription as far as managing people practices are concerned. There is no single prescription which will work everywhere. So these are some of the things that I just thought that in a short time I must share with all of you. Once again, thank you very much, Indira Management Association, for inviting me and giving me this platform to share my views. I think we are at 3:31, so I'm almost on time. Told me 3 to 3:30. So
request Sheetal ma'am, can you have some questions? Sunil sir, you have some questions, so you can always ask.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Jain. You can continue. Sheetal, you can continue.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jain. Parikh sir, thanks a lot for this wonderful session. Really, this new normal norms are definitely going to help I had one question to you, sir. That how can we be more productive in these times? Like when these times are, we have sales force with us, we have service force with us. There is danger outside. People can't move much for the aggressive sales. They can't go much for aggressive service disruptions. So how can we motivate our team to achieve our targets, to be more productive in this time, and to stay definitely to stay motivated?
Yeah, I think two very, very important aspects you brought in, and I think those are realities. Sustaining motivation and sustaining productivity. I think these are, if you ask me in these two words, everything gets covered as far as organization is concerned. Okay. And that's where, so I will be referring some of the new normals that I talked about. The first and very important thing is the communication part. Okay, and I'll tell you, we have about 45, 49 members in my team, okay, the entire business. Since March that we started, lockdown, we have a Monday open house meeting. And the other day I was chatting with them. I said, now that this has become a routine thing, is it okay if we do it once in fortnight instead of once in a week? Okay. In any case, it is half an hour to 45 minutes, maybe max 1 hour. And the overwhelming response was that, no, we want it every week. Okay. And what I realized the power of communication. Now, ours is a very, very small organization, but I can tell you, you're being a large organization, what kind of communication channels are operative on a sustained basis is very critical. Because in those communication channels, it would be important to share certain updates. And these are, I'm talking of candid communication. I'm not talking of some gyan that we get from Google and we keep sharing those things. We are talking about business. We are talking about organizations. We are talking about individuals who took extraordinary steps. We are talking about somebody reaching out to a colleague in distress in the evening, and then sharing from him as to what motivated you to really do that part, that extraordinary effort. So I think create that kind of communication platform is very, very important. And again, I'm using the word candid communication because often communication remains one way, and we feel that people buy whatever we say. May not be. So I think candid communication is, and there are platforms and methodology that one could do. The second very important aspect is reduce the performance cycles. Keeping in view annuals, quarter, half yearly, all those plans to a very short cycle. It depends on the business from where you are coming. It depends on the sales or service cycle, but as short cycle as possible, so that you can check that this is what I had planned in next 1 week. Okay. What I could do and what I could not do. For example, let's say. We a pharma sales team, and they are not allowed by their customers to visit them. Now, what do they do? How do they engage their customers? And there are ways and means by which they are engaging their customers. We all are aware about it. So those ways and means people have found, and they are discovering more and more and more ways and means to share those things. So I think this is, on the contrary, giving us a huge opportunity to look at productivity from a completely different lens, in a modular manner rather than one composite productivity of annual, half yearly, and quarterly, which is of course from various statute point of view also they are required. But then this is very important. The third important aspect for motivation and performance productivity combined is the way my managers, my team leaders, my senior leadership team thinks, feels, and behaves. Very, very important. If in their conversation, it may be one-on-one, in their discussions with their support for ideas, if they are constantly giving different messages without sharing the rationale or logic behind that, challenges could come up where people are getting disengaged. It's important, and engagement has a straight impact on productivity, straight impact. Highly engaged workforce will always look for better productivity. I'm not saying pre-COVID, post-COVID. I think because industry to industry differs, and whether your industry is in V recession, U recession, L recession, it all differs. But in general, the leadership plays very critical role in those kind of productivity.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sunil ji, any question?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Samir, for giving a good insight about the people management and which is linked to the business strategies and all this thing. It's a very good, and in a very short time, probably you could cover up all the aspects of the HR or people management. So it's a very good, though it was a little fast, but anyway, we know all this kind of things. It's a very good. I liked very good thing. First, you talk about the resilience and agility. I think this is a time when agility is very, very important. And second thing, just now you're talking about our communication also. My question rather than I'll say, when we talk about majority, this all looks good. But you know, when you talk about a real business, because HR is basically a business partner also nowadays.
Absolutely.
So business,
Absolutely.
yeah, and actually business comes from the sales. Either whichever field you are, whatever you are manufacturing or what you are doing service, actually it comes from the sales or service. So now the difficulty which I think most of the companies sales personnel which are really in the field, they are facing problem because manufacturing is one aspect within a house we are there, so we can manage all our aspects of the new COVID norms or new norms of the people management. But the main difficulty is the field people. Those, I mean, when the customer, there are some customers which is not organized sector. There are many which is unorganized sector. How to do a communication with them and have a same kind of the sales strategy or marketing strategy without meeting or having a physical contacts with them. So because that I feel is a very challenging for each business, if I feel so, in my opinion. So what do you think that what should be really as a HR professional? How can we really have our those frontliners or field team to really sustain the business or even increase the business rather than alter?
Okay, I think first and foremost, products could remain same, markets could remain same, customers could remain same, but sales strategies cannot remain same. So if we are saying that with the same sales strategy, I want my people to do selling, I think somewhere we are riding on a unwilling horse. So I think it's important for us to reframe entire sales strategy by taking people opinions and their ideas and their contributions in that design. I know we may have spent a lot of time and days and years of experience to come out with the strategy, and it becomes difficult at times for us to. I'll give you just one example. My company is on Microsoft Teams platform for last 3 years, and we were hardly using it for virtual communication. Today, the scenario is that a regular phone call is being replaced by Microsoft Teams. The point is, we had a belief that unless there is a face-to-face interaction, this I'm talking about myself as well. Unless there is a face-to-face interaction, things cannot change. Unless there is a face-to-face training program, it cannot be effective. Unless there is a face-to-face meeting, we can't understand what people are saying. Unless there is a face-to-face discussion point, I think people have learned very fast. I think one thing which I must give credit to all the workforce across the globe is an outstanding learning curve that they all have demonstrated as they have started using this. And most of your salespeople also have started realizing, understanding, using this. Today, now in my office, and I'm sure in all your offices also, there is a conversation based on a telephone, email, or some web platform conversation. Somebody says, "Why is she talking like this? I am not seeing her really putting her best. I think she is not happy with the way things are happening in the organization." They have not met for last 3-4 months, and still this comment. And believe me, that's very right. I echoed. I said, "Yeah, you are right. That is something has happened. I can't share with you, but something has happened, and therefore that is not going well." So it's a misconception that in virtual world we cannot accept certain kinds of business, which is where you can't help it. Okay, so that is, and we all know the type of industries which are still under lockdown. So I'm not going to spend more time on that. But the type of industries where they have identified, they are exploring ways and means to float around, to push that. I think all of us have started accepting the new normal of social distancing, masking, hand washing. So I think that's the new normal, all of us. And in fact, this is the time I must also wish all of us continue to be healthy. But all of us also need to be very clear that if at all it comes, most of the people, majority of them get recovered. So I think that's how we will have to take it, and we'll have to redesign our strategy accordingly. I think you are on mute, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Parikh, for the wonderful session and for sharing your valuable thoughts. We look forward to have you again at IMA platform surely as the lockdown opens.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Pleasure meeting all of you. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will request all the participants to remain as they are because we will be starting with the meeting. And I will request Ina ma'am, General Manager of the Management Association, along with her panelist Sheetal ma'am and Sunil Kalyankar sir, to please start with this meeting.
Can we